The majestic appearance of the palace struck the imagination of everyone who looked at it. Our heroine was born the first princess of the kingdom and always lived for the sake of her brother, who would become king, her sister and parents, and most importantly, for the sake of the people. Her parents persuaded her not to go out into high society, asked her to leave it to her brother and sister. They said that they wanted to protect the girl in this way. She had no choice but to be glad that her family cherished her so much. However, even so, she was still engaged in political affairs and devoted her free time to the study of magic, so she felt her life full and happy. However, happiness was not destined to last forever, and the usual life was shattered to pieces on the day when the Chariot Empire declared war. The people suffered, the second princess Nicole was taken hostage, and the royal family had no choice but to ask Lars, our heroine, to lend her immense magical power. Giving all of herself to her loved ones and the kingdom, the princess did not hesitate to agree to go to the battlefield. Raging flames streamed at her behest, consuming everything it touched in its path. Even those who could no longer fight could not be left alive. Through the roar of the merciless elements, cries were heard begging for mercy. The princess hesitated, but she had no choice. The battle had to end at all costs. For the sake of her family, for the sake of the people, and for the sake of those who stood beside her on this battlefield, she had to step over herself. And in the end, the fire consumed everything, leaving only embers and echoes of screams echoing in the memory. However, this was not enough to match the military might of the Chariot Empire, and all the survivors were overtaken by the fact that the Kingdom of Berry had admitted defeat. Lars was captured, and the days that lay ahead of her turned out to be a living hell. Once in prison, she could not believe her ears because, as she was informed, her imprisonment was a condition for Nicole's return to her homeland. Our heroine denied to the last that this was possible. Her own parents could not sell her, and even because they did not want to wait long for the rescue of the second princess. The nightmare continued, for she saw the emperor himself, a handsome-looking man with silver hair and a look as cold as his heart. He intended to make his toy out of the princess, to which she responded with undisguised irritation. A strong-hearted girl, even in such a situation, refused to betray her country, because despite everything, she is still the proud princess of the Kingdom of Berry, and she had to pay for her pride. The days that dragged on endlessly one after another merged into a continuous stream of pain and despair. The emperor visited Lars from time to time, not giving up trying to make her his mistress. But the girl was adamant, no matter how much she was tortured, she did not lose her royal pride. The emperor was unable to influence her in any way. Tired of endless attempts, he did what was least expected of him. He healed a wounded girl with his magic. The man suddenly declared that his proposal was sincere, but after all this torture, hardly anyone would believe him. In the end, he called the princess the same as himself, so he hoped that she would understand him and sent her home. And now, 10 years later, Lars returned to her homeland where a new hell awaited her. It turned out that she alone was accused of both unleashing this war and further defeat. Her family, for the sake of which she went through 10 years of suffering, made a scapegoat out of her. Their mocking smiles, words, all their hatred for their sister who sacrificed herself for them, became a new nightmare that overshadowed all the tortures that our heroine had to go through. They never considered Lars a family, only used her whenever and however they wanted. In the end, they claimed that she was not their father's daughter at all, but his brother, whom the royal family hated to the core. As a result, everything was made out as if the princess unleashed a war just to boast of her magical power. She was betrayed, trampled on everything she cherished, left to rot in prison and wait in the wings. Only her servant, faithful to the very end, came to her to give her at least a little food. The desperate girl wanted to know at least what had happened in the palace over the years, because she did not want to die without knowing anything. The man, who was not yet able to help her in any way because of his position, told the princess everything he knew. Soon after, Lars was decided to be executed for crimes she didn't even commit. A girl who only tried for the sake of the family, so happy only because she was appreciated. What happened to her? Images from the past flashed before my eyes. She stepped over herself so many times, and all for the sake of the people who stabbed her in the back. The angry crowd, blinded by false accusations, demanded only one thing: the death of the unfortunate girl. Having gone through all this torment, the princess found herself at the very bottom of the abyss of despair, from where there was no way back. The haughty glances of the royal family cut into the girl sharper than a knife. There was nothing left in her gaze except one question. Why? Why should she, who gave everything for them, now die, branded with the greatest evil? She was not destined to find an answer because the time had come and the sentence was executed. Or rather, it had to happen. Not understanding anything, Lars looked around, trying to figure out where she was and why she was still alive. The servants calmly went about their business, as if nothing had happened. And the man she saw in the dungeon, why does he look younger? And not only him, the princess herself looked younger than during the war. One of the maids mentioned Nicole's recent birthday, which confused our heroine even more. When Lars asked what year it was, she found herself more than 10 years in the past. While she was in shock, the maids continued their daily conversations as if nothing had happened, as if all the horror that the princess had to endure did not exist at all. Trying to maintain her composure, the girl decided to keep up the conversation, although it was difficult for her. And it was about a letter that said that Princess Barry wanted to be accepted as Empress Chariot. Lars was flooded with memories of what Nicole's wedding to the Emperor had led to. Unable to believe what was happening, she looked in the mirror again, seeing her young self in the reflection, still without scars from war and torture. Would she have to suffer again? An unwanted war, 10 years of imprisonment and torture, the betrayal of those whom she considered the closest people. And in the end, such an unjust death, all these memories ate the girl from the inside. Did she really deserve such an end? The distorted soul saw its former self in the mirror, wounded and devastated. Unable to withstand such a burden, Lars, in hysterics, smashed the first thing that came to hand. For herself, the princess decided only one thing: she would never be able to forgive all those who caused her so much pain. Nor the people of the empire who tortured her for 10 long years. Nor his once beloved family that turned away from her. The girl stood silently, trying to collect her thoughts, while all the servants were frightened by her sudden behavior. Worried guards burst into the room, ready to rush to help at any moment. But Lars did not notice them, absorbed in pain and hatred. Finally calming down, the heroine only said that she just had a hard time. She had a chance to change your personal nightmare, your life. Never again will she allow herself to be used. At that moment, another maid came into the room with an important message. The king had summoned the whole family. Not understanding what was happening, she could only squeeze out a few abrupt phrases, but they were enough for Lars to understand the situation. Of course, because she had already lived through this moment once, and it became a turning point in her life. The maid, calming down a little, told the princess the words of the king, which she already knew, that the meeting would be about a letter from the Chariot Empire. Determined to change her fate, our heroine agreed to come, but this time she is no longer a sweet and naive girl, and she will no longer allow her so-called family to trample on her life. The servants who were nearby knew exactly the truth about what was happening behind Lars's back. However, it is too early to reveal all the cards, and for now she will play along with everyone. After all, the letter did not say that it was Nicole who should go, so why not take her place? Unlike the second princess, our heroine knew that this wedding was a trap to force Barry to capitulate in the war. She knew what consequences this union would lead to, which means she could influence further events for the better. No one else would dare to falsely blame a girl for all the troubles. If people want to see her as a villain, well, she will become one. And so the family meeting began, and just like last time, the choice immediately fell on Nicole. It was she who everyone wanted to see as empress. According to all the rules, the first princess should have been chosen, but the previous Lars simply supported her sister. At that time, she still sincerely considered Nicole her sweet little sister, who deserved all the best. But now she understood that unlike the second princess whom everyone loved, Lars was just an empty space for everyone. The one who always worked harder than anyone else was simply thrown onto the battlefield. They forced him to give up everything to save Nicole. For the sake of her family, the princess went to kill people, put herself in danger, and was ready for anything. But in the end, it was considered an unnecessary thing, kept nearby only because it could be sold at a profit. And while everyone was saying that Nicole should become the empress, Lars took the first step towards her new life by objecting to this. Of course, everyone was worried. Shouldn't she support her younger sister? But our heroine did not even think of retreating. She stated that the second princess would certainly become a worthy empress, but her fiancé was known to be a ruthless tyrant. There are countless people who have been executed at one word of his, and Nicole, who was raised in love, will surely be afraid of him. This man killed his own father with his own hands. You can't give him such a gentle girl. Our heroine knew from her own experience how dangerous this person is, but it is better to go to him than to stay with those who are ready to betray her at the first opportunity. Yes, he did not treat even his own subordinates humanely. But even so, next to him, the chance of changing everything is much higher than in a family of traitors. Lars continued her speech by mentioning that the emperor also had 6 concubines who would kill each other for his favor. Nicole will have to endure such an attitude towards herself in a foreign land, even alone. How can you send her there? All these arguments made the royal family think, and Lars continued to play a loving sister who cannot condemn her sweet sister to such torment. In the past, Nicole wanted to escape from the empire in a month. The conditions there were really unbearable for such a baby. Therefore, our heroine proposed her candidacy, and unlike Nicole, she was sure that she could cope with everything herself. Continuing to act out her performance, the princess said that for the sake of her sister, she was ready to become a replacement. In the past, our heroine was really ready to give her life for Nicole, until she saw that mocking smile. And while everyone was saying hypocritical words of support, Lars thought only that this time it would not be she who would be thrown out. And so, after a while, the wedding took place. The neglect, indifference, loneliness that awaited Lars in this marriage did not bother her at all. Compared to war, where you had to step over yourself over and over again, burning countless people to the ground, this is nothing. She had to go through too much in those 10 years, including her own death, so unjust and merciless. And now our heroine has a new goal. She will personally win Barry. Meanwhile, the ceremony was coming to an end. 2 cold gazes met to conclude this union without a drop of feelings. The rays of the setting sun lit up the scene of the kiss of people who were as beautiful on the outside as they were cold on the inside. But let's digress for a while and talk about magic. The flames of the Berry Kingdom, the healing power of the Sharialt Empire, they were united by the fact that the pure-blooded members of the ruling families were the most talented magicians. And our heroine was extraordinary even against the background of her family, which was one of the reasons why she is considered the heir of her uncle, and not the king. He possessed the most powerful magic in the kingdom, and the queen was once betrothed to him, but in the end she chose the first prince to become king. In turn, Emperor Sharialt, Zephon Barb Verbena, was the son of one of the 10 concubines of the first ruler and the wielder of the most powerful magic in his family. Back to the ceremony, it ended with Zephon saying a few sarcastic words and simply walking away, leaving Lars alone. The only person the former princess and now empress could really rely on was her servant Shin, the same man who told her about everything that happened in the empire during her imprisonment. It would have been wiser to take a maid with him, but as a sign of gratitude, the choice fell on him. It was not that Lars trusted him completely, but he was always on her side. The more the girl communicated with him, the more it seemed to her that he was not a person at all. He always unquestioningly did his job, but could never establish communication with others. When all the people began to hate the princess, Shin became her servant and helped as much as he could, treating her without any prejudice, and for that, Lars was really grateful to him. Unlike the local maids, who didn't pay attention even if they were called, which left all the work on Shin's shoulders. Of course, this is much better than her life in prison, but our heroine is no longer going to live a life in which you have to endure. It is time to change this dismissive attitude. After asking for water, she didn't let Shin do all the work again. Instead, she grabbed one of the maids who had been ignoring her so far, which she clearly didn't expect. Lars, lighting the flames in her hand, asked who had given the order to ignore her. Fearing for her life, the maid immediately gave out that it was all the work of the head maid, after which she ran to get a glass of water for our heroine. The empress, having received the glass, immediately poured it on the girl, but only so that she could lie, as if she had said nothing, for which she was punished. Realizing the situation, the grateful maid hurried away. Meanwhile, Lars was considering this order. If she had been her past self, she would have been a little hurt by such an attitude, but after everything she had experienced, it was a mere trifle. But this does not mean that you should get away with this. After questioning the rest of the maids, she was convinced that it was the head maid who had given the order, which means it's time to give her a warm welcome, because they clearly have something to talk about. But let's go back to the past for a while, namely Nicole, who tore to shreds a toy she didn't like and demands a new one, her brother, who refuses to study because it is boring for him, and our heroine, once diligent and full of kindness to everyone. The key word is once. After all, while she was destroying the room, there was only one thought in her head. Being broken is always so exciting. The head maid was shocked by what she saw, but Lars only asked why no one came to clean up. Not knowing what to do, the woman just stood silently in the middle of the chaos. And our heroine continued her performance, playing the unfortunate cutie who was so lonely all these days. The head maid replied that she had nothing to do with it, and if this was her order, shouldn't Lars have realized her power and sat quietly? Receiving nothing in return, the woman went out to the fullest, showering the Empress with her disdain. And at some point she finally crossed the line, making Lars lose her temper. This means that now it is the turn of our heroine to show who has power here and who is just a servant. There is no need to hide your intentions in front of this woman who is not aware of her situation. Not expecting a rebuff, the head maid was seriously frightened, but she still knew what awaited her next. After all, Lars decided to clearly explain to her that she was not going to tolerate such an attitude. One by one, the words came out of her tongue, making it clear that even if something happened, the Emperor wouldn't care about any maidservant, after which she took out the scissors. Of course, seeing this, the woman was horrified. And Lars only said that since this was the first time, she would limit herself to her hair. Despite all the pleas to stop, the Empress, of course, proceeded to punish, and of course did not stop when she injured the maid's cheek for breaking free. And again, screams, but not on the battlefield, but from a woman who dared to go against our heroine. With so many screams over such a trifle, Lars began to think back to the years of torture, which only made her angrier. The maid in tears asked to stop, said that she would order to clean the room, that she admitted her guilt, but it did not matter. Unfortunately for the woman, Lars is no longer the sweet and kind girl she was in her past life. The next morning, the whole room was shining with cleanliness, cleaned during the night by the head maid alone. Our heroine enjoyed a cup of fragrant tea as if nothing had happened, expressing serenity with all her appearance. And rumors were already circulating in the palace about the princess, who was known as a villain in her homeland, and who now mocked the maids. According to these rumors, Lars deposed her brother Eric, the heir to the throne, constantly raised taxes and held parties. She threatened the king and more than once rewrote the entire law, planned the trade routes of her country so that the allies would attack the ships. In the eyes of the people, our heroine was the embodiment of evil, a gloomy puppeteer who plays with people, destroying destinies for the sake of fun. In addition, unlike the royal family, her hair was not golden but black, and as a result, she was nicknamed the Bat Princess. In the meantime, Zephon had heard the news of what had happened to the head maid, but he was indifferent as expected. Lars was just as indifferent. Now she was not worried about rumors or maids because she had received an invitation to a tea party and was thinking about whether to go. A sudden anger enveloped the heroine when she realized who exactly had sent the invitation. The fourth concubine, Elisa Annette, who in a previous life regularly came to the dungeon to mock Lars. She and her retinue tortured the poor girl over and over again. Their words did not compare to a sword wound, but they hurt the pride of the princess, who at that time was still loyal to the kingdom. Even when Lars was deprived of her sight, she looked at the heroine with the whole crowd as if she were a beast, grinning at her. However, the anger quickly receded, leaving room for one simple desire, namely, the desire for revenge. It was tea time, where all the talk was about how horrible Lars was and how noble Eliza was. The Empress, however, missed this chatter and appeared a little later, carefully concealing her dislike of all those present. No matter how hard Eliza tried to feign a warm welcome, the wounds left by her words were still fresh in her memory. Among all these people, there was only one girl who had treated Lars with kindness in the past, but apparently she did not attend the tea party. But there were all those who were eager to mock the Bat Princess from Barry. Eliza started talking about our heroine's hair, different from the golden curls of the royal family, not even hinting, but directly calling her an illegitimate child. But Lars didn't care about their words. On the contrary, she saw them as an opportunity. After all, she was the legal wife of the emperor, unlike the others, which meant that if they had children, they would definitely be illegitimate. Children who will become a disgrace to the family, there will be a huge number of rumors around them, and in their veins there will be only half royal blood, which is unlikely to make them loved by their own father. Not expecting to hear this, Eliza snapped, while our heroine only smiled sweetly and clearly enjoyed what was happening. But it was time for a meal with the emperor, which Lars had not forgotten to mention to emphasize their closeness before leaving this den of snakes. After a couple of sarcastic phrases at the end, she left after this tea party in high spirits, unlike the fourth concubine who was seriously hurt by such words and behavior. Now she saw the Empress not just as her rival, but as a sworn enemy. Lars sat tightly in her head, making her more and more inflamed. Eliza remembered how close she had once been to the Emperor. Lately, however, he had cooled down just as Lars had arrived. As a result, the girl firmly decided to achieve the expulsion of the Empress from the palace at all costs. Couldn't it be that His Majesty really had feelings for her? Noticing nearby workers who were repainting the walls, Eliza immediately figured out how to annoy our heroine. Meanwhile, Lars was preening herself before a joint meal. The Emperor needs this marriage to get a hostage from Barry, which means that in order to avoid another imprisonment, he needs to prove his worth to him. Fortunately, Lars has more than enough information to take advantage of and offer. While she was preparing for the meeting, the Empress received a message allegedly from the Emperor, but immediately realized that this was a ruse because he had no reason to write to her. However, any trick can be turned to your advantage, which Lars decided to take advantage of. There was no one at the place indicated in the message, and while the heroine was trying to understand what exactly the ill-wishers were up to, she was doused with paint. And again, Eliza, who else could it be? Lars just silently looked at the offenders, but not at all from shock. She simply does not need to waste her time on such trifles. The Emperor saw everything that had happened, but of course, he did not interfere. And he left before he could find the heroine not only not saddened by what happened, but even joyful. Zephon waited for his wife for a long time, and despite all his insensitivity, did not touch the food. But his patience is not eternal, and besides, he did not understand the situation at all, and decided that Lars was just a weakling who was probably now locked in the room and crying. However, just before he left the room, his wife appeared in front of him, shocking him with her new image. In a past life, after going through the same thing, Nicole threw a tantrum. Tired of not being cared for, she just couldn't stand it. This is not surprising because a very young girl was bullied by everyone around her. As a result, unable to endure it any longer, she wrote a letter in which she complained about the injustice that was happening to her in the hope that her sister would come and solve all her problems. But let's return to the present, where the meal has already begun. The heroine just silently looked at her husband, waiting for his reaction. Her hair, once the color of the night sky, was now shimmering gold. Even a man like Zephon was surprised by what he saw. In fact, black was never her natural color. Her parents forced her to wear makeup, ostensibly to protect her from those who might covet her magical powers. Lars continued to dye her hair, just to avoid unnecessary hype, but now there was no need for it. Gold or silver hair was a symbol of royal blood and an indicator of outstanding abilities for magic. And the heroine's family, hiding behind care, forced Lars to hide this color in order to destroy her reputation. Just a glint of gold in her hair already showed what she was worth. Meanwhile, the Emperor still could not hide his surprise. In an attempt to calm down, he emptied his glass without even touching the food. Not understanding what was happening was getting on his nerves. Trying to find a logical explanation for the situation, he assumed that Lars dyed her hair gold. However, she denied these words, stating that it was her natural color, and she had to hide it because of the rules of the family. The Emperor began to ask about the reasons for such rules, to which Lars replied that for the sake of her brother and sister, who were less gifted in magic. After all, if people found out that there was someone stronger in the royal family than the heir to the throne, he would be weak in their eyes, and Nicole, in turn, had a less pure shade, which could affect her reputation in high society. And the Emperor continued his questioning. He didn't understand, wouldn't it be better to make the stronger one the heir? In order not to reveal the fact that she was simply used, our heroine decided to answer these questions evasively, pretending that everything is actually logical. In the end, she simply changed the subject, focusing on how she and Zephon fit together. However, the emperor was cold as usual and said that there were enough women in the palace who were of much greater value, and our heroine was just a political tool. But Lars wasn't going to agree with this so easily, because she was much more valuable than any of Zephon's concubines. Such a statement seriously infuriated His Majesty, who did not want to recognize our heroine as a full-fledged empress. Before her, there were many women who tried to get closer to him, and what happened to them in the end? Zephon directly told the heroine that if she continued in the same vein, death awaited her. However, Lars was not bothered by his words, because she had information that would undoubtedly interest the emperor and make it really valuable in his eyes. She uttered only one phrase, the White Meridian, and this was enough to interest Zephon. After all, this is the name of a merchant ship on which the entire fate of the Sherialt Empire depended. Its route skirted most of the continent, and for an empire located in a cold region, this ship was an indispensable way to extract resources. And Lars knew that in a month, this ship would be attacked by the allies of the Kingdom of Barry. The entire crew will be killed and the goods will be stolen, putting the Sherialt Empire at a severe disadvantage. While Barry and Capricorn will receive unprecedented benefits, Lars tried to stop her father in a past life because Nicole was the Empress of Sherialt at that moment, but no one listened to her because friendly relations with the Empire were only a pretense. The princess was persuaded that this was necessary for both Barry and Capricorn. Besides, if everything goes smoothly, the Empire won't even know who was behind it. One by one, the king's words led Lars to believe that the Barrys were doing the right thing, and that it was primarily for Nicole's sake. In the end, all the blame was shifted to the Kingdom of Castle, where the White Meridian had last stayed. The Empire managed to compensate for all losses, but it took a lot of time and effort. And the real culprits, who made huge profits, were never found. Therefore, our heroine decided to prevent this incident. She said that she knew the exact time and place of the attack, and the Emperor, although he did not trust her words, was still interested in this information. Lars offered to check if she was right, because she still had a lot of useful knowledge that could prove her worth. However, she did not reveal all the cards at once because her goal now was to intrigue Zephon. And she managed to get her way. The Emperor became interested in our heroine, and now he could no longer harm her before she told everything she knew. He agreed to verify the information about the attack on the ship, and said that if Lars was right, he would recognize its value. The heroine only smiled back, confident in her rightness. She didn't care about Zephon's words about the consequences if she lied. Although the Emperor did not trust her, this is only for now. And sometime later, rumors of what had happened reached Eliza. She appeared in front of the Emperor with golden hair and also bargained with him. The fourth concubine, who already hated the Empress, decided to make her feel sorry for her at all costs. And our heroine, meanwhile, calmly enjoyed reading, gradually planning her further actions. A maid came into the room to deliver an urgent message. Lars reluctantly distracted herself from her thoughts. The letter was torn to shreds, and the maid said it had been that way in the first place. Putting the pieces together, the Empress realized that the message was from her father. Not wanting to have anything to do with him, she simply brushed this letter aside. Scraps of paper, on which were written feigned words of tenderness and concern, flew into the trash. Although this letter was not something important for Lars, she was not going to allow herself to be treated like this. And she already guessed who had broken it, because the same thing had happened to Nicole in the past. Our heroine decided to meet with the culprit, and in the near future there was just an occasion. A Christmas party, which would be attended by all the concubines. Lars, already anticipating his revenge, asked Shin to tell him that she would also come. The faithful servant, of course, went to carry out this order. And our heroine, enjoying what was happening, decided to go for a walk. The greenhouse, which was more like a whole garden, was breathtaking. A huge room in which, despite the cold outside, there was a separate world full of greenery and flowers. Lars accidentally met a young girl there drinking tea alone. Noticing our heroine, she jumped up from her seat in fright. She immediately recognized Lars as the Empress, although she was surprised by the color of her hair. The heroine, full of calm, confirmed that she was indeed Zephon's wife. The awkward girl immediately began to apologize for interfering with the walk. Lars finally understood who was in front of her, the third concubine of the Emperor, Sasha Lebedeva. Our heroine was wary of the girl because she was not sure who bullied her in her past life after she was deprived of her sight. When asked why she was so nervous, even though she was elected emperor, Sasha replied that this was not the case. She had no power, and she became a concubine only for the sake of establishing diplomatic relations. Thinking that she could get a lot of useful information from this girl, Lars offered her a cup of tea together. And so, the drink and delicious desserts were served. Sasha sincerely admired the taste, or maybe she just played well. Our heroine did not know it yet. The conversation turned to sweets that would go well with tea, and then the heroine realized that she did not understand at all either popular snacks or the latest fashion trends in general. Her family kept her away from society, and Lars simply could not know such things. Despite the fact that her heart was covered with a layer of ice after all the events she had experienced, our heroine was still embarrassed by such a situation. Noticing this, Sasha hurried to calm her down, and Lars changed the subject. She began to ask about the rest of the emperor's concubines, and her interlocutor was not at all opposed to sharing her knowledge. Most of these girls were chasing the title of empress, but Zephon showed no interest in them. There have been cases where women have lost their lives trying to seduce him with their beauty because he is only interested in the one who has value. And the closest to this was the girl after whose appearance no one aspired to the title of empress, the sixth concubine, who got rid of everyone who approached Zephon. And Lars was worried that such a woman was still sitting quietly, unlike Eliza. The fourth concubine, in turn, is very jealous and hostile to all the girls near the emperor. She plotted various schemes to become Zephon's wife, and in comparison, her group was one step ahead of the sixth concubine. Sasha, however, avoided all these intrigues, so she was simply not taken into account because of her appearance. She asked Lars to be more careful, especially with Eliza. The empress, in response to this, directly asked why the girl was helping her. Sasha replied that she was glad to be allowed to live in the palace, and that she would not dare to go against the emperor's lawful wife. After all, initially it should not be in this palace. After a stream of self-deprecating statements, the heroine decided to help this girl at least a little. Even if these are just words, the empress supported Sasha, letting her know that she is better than she says about herself. In addition, the heroine finally remembered her voice, asking for forgiveness. The third concubine was the very person who sincerely apologized for everything that happened and offered painkiller wine, the only girl who tried to help in any way. Then Lars could not believe her at once. She decided that this wine was poisoned, because there could not be such a kind person in such a place. In response to the rudeness, Sasha asked only one thing: to allow her to pray for our heroine. As always, the unfair girl sincerely tried to do at least something for the prisoner. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she prayed for Lars, unable to change her fate. After Sasha left, the princess still decided to drink the remains of wine spilled on the floor. There was no poison in them. Memories made the heroine reconsider her suspicious attitude towards the girl. Maybe she didn't know the third concubine that well yet. But full of gratitude for everything, the empress decided to get closer to this girl at all costs when she removed all obstacles from her path. And now it's time for the Christmas party. New rumors were circulating among the people about the empress, about her hair color, powerful magic, and how she was suitable for the role of empress. And there was someone who was not happy about these rumors at all, a fourth concubine who doesn't even try to hide her hostility. Appearing at the reception, our heroine attracted the eyes of all those present by her appearance alone. And of course, this hurt Eliza's pride greatly. She immediately came up to greet Lars, smiling falsely and showering her with rather hurtful words. Eliza decided to make the heroine lose her temper, without even trying to veil her insults. However, Lars easily parried her words, making them a compliment. With this, she angered the fourth concubine even more, who could hardly control herself. Not wanting to continue this conversation, the heroine said that she still needed to greet the party organizer, after which she left, leaving Eliza alone with her anger. But the retinue of the fourth concubine did not want to leave everything as it was. Finally, one of the girls tripped the empress, and although Shin managed to catch Lars, she remembered those who accompanied Eliza. At that moment, the princess who had organized the party came up, so that our heroine pretended that nothing had happened. As she exchanged warm greetings, even more annoyed girls stared at her back. Everyone at the reception discussed the beauty of the Empress, while Eliza and her entourage poured mud on her, unable to join the conversation with those around them. They again thought about how to annoy Lars, not understanding what awaited them for this. Blinded by their malice, they could only make plans, unable to really do anything. They did not have to wait long for a new meeting with the Empress. She herself approached the girls. Eliza wondered why Lars had come, as always, with a note of mockery. To this, our heroine calmly replied that she just wanted to communicate. However, her gaze was not fixed on the fourth concubine, but on the girl because of whom she had almost fallen earlier. A shout suddenly sounded in the banquet hall. Lars simply shut the offender's mouth, quietly telling her to be quiet. And the reason for this scream was the sharp heel that pierced the delicate skin of the girl, who did not expect such consequences for her actions. When asked what she allowed herself, the Empress replied that she was simply teaching these girls etiquette, because it was impossible for them to continue to behave like this in polite society. You can gather people around you as much as you want, change tactics one by one. Eliza will never get the Emperor's attention anyway. After all, in his eyes, there was no value in this girl, which the heroine said directly. Driven to a rage, the fourth concubine threw a shard of glass at Lars. Her entourage tried to calm her down, saying that even she was not allowed to behave like that with the Empress, but it was too late. Our heroine could ignore any offensive words, but she will not allow anyone to treat herself in such a way. Without expressing any emotion, she slowly picked up a knife from the table nearby. Convinced that she was Zephon's favorite, Eliza continued to incite Lars. She believed that our heroine was bluffing and would not do anything, fearing the wrath of the Emperor, but she was wrong. Of course, Lars was not going to hurt the girl, but it was not difficult to cut her dress. All these events were seen by many people, and no one rushed to help the girl except for her retinue. And our heroine, handing the knife to her servant, only said that Eliza should say such things to her reflection in the mirror, and not to other people. The humiliated girl could only look back angrily, unable to do anything. And the heroine continued her monologue, saying that the Emperor would not protect either her or Eliza. Because of the two of them, he was able to protect himself, and so it was clear. Towering over the humiliated girl, such a scene was already in the past. However, this time they switched places. Pleased with this outcome, Lars haughtily chuckled at her offender. The guests present at the party, contrary to Eliza's expectations, took the side of the Empress, discussed how pathetic the fourth concubine was. Our heroine has been through too much to break down because of some concubine. She said that Eliza could come at any time, the result would not change. And from the outside, the one with whom the heroine did not really want to mess with, was watching what was happening. The Emperor's sixth concubine, Kamila Kruzinski. She hadn't paid much attention to Lars before, as she hadn't considered her a rival, but now she realized that she was wrong about it. Meanwhile, the silence of the night was broken by the clatter of wheels and hooves. Emperor Zephon arrived at the party, wondering how Lars would behave in front of the concubines. In his eyes, she was a gentle and innocent girl, hardly able to fight back. Entering the hall, he immediately realized that something was wrong here. The reception was in full swing, and everyone had gathered in one place. His eyes fell on Eliza, who was just then walking away, covering herself with a piece of cloth. Zephon began to ask people about what had happened here. Very nervous, the girls who saw what happened tried to explain everything. However, the Emperor considered himself above talking to them and ordered them to be silent. All the information was given to him by his personal servants, who had already managed to find out what had happened. When he understood everything, Eliza's carriage was already driving away, taking the humiliated girl away. The Emperor did not expect this from Lars at all. Now he was really interested in it. Now it became clear to him that our heroine was not at all as weak as it seemed at first glance. All the girls before her were discouraged when they encountered Eliza and Kamila. He thought that Lars would retreat if he scared her a little. But our heroine is not the same as her predecessors. She responds to her offenders with her head held high, not afraid to do things that are crazy by the standards of others. The Emperor wondered how she would react to his appearance at the banquet. His gaze was cold as usual, but in his thoughts he was seriously intrigued. When he found Lars, she didn't look scared or upset, didn't even pay attention to the wound on her cheek. She felt like she wasn't here in her own world. However, the appearance of Zephon brought her back to reality. The Empress did not expect to meet him here at all. When asked what she had done here, the heroine replied that everything was fine, and that everyone was very happy about her visit, avoiding talking about the torn dress. Then the emperor asked her about it directly, and realizing that there was no point in hiding it, the heroine only smiled in response, confirming his suspicions. It was obvious that she was proud of herself, and this annoyed Zephon. Eliza controlled 70% of trade with the Kingdom of Yulain, which had previously refused to have any diplomatic relations with Shariult. And now, if relations with the Count were severed because of this incident, then ties with the ruler of Yulain would also be broken. The heroine pretended to be sorry and, lowering her eyes, apologized. However, she immediately made it clear that it was just a game, asking with a haughty look why Zephon needed Eliza if he now had Lars. At that moment, the princess arrived with the doctor, worried about the empress's wound. However, the emperor pushed the doctor away, knocking over his suitcase with medicines on the floor. He could not allow such impudence to a girl who had not yet proven her worth, but was already declaring that no one else was needed except her. The worried guests stood silently aside, afraid to make a sound. And Lars, full of confidence, said that very soon the emperor would see and understand everything himself. Her words did not inspire much confidence, but Zephon was too shocked by the fearless nature of the heroine and could not answer, and the empress calmly wiped the blood with her finger. An unexpected gesture on her part surprised everyone present even more. She gently applied her blood to the emperor's lips. The already shocked man could only listen to the fact that he should be patient. Some time later, the heroine examined the place of the cut in the mirror. Thanks to the healing magic that Shariult specializes in, there is no trace of the wound. Shin stared at the girl without expressing any emotion, but although you can't tell from him, he was worried about her, and at the same time admired how she withstood all the problems. The empress noticed his gaze, from which it was still impossible to understand what the man was thinking. She suggested that he call a healer if he too was hit by shrapnel, suggesting that this was the reason for such a close look. Shin refused, saying that if there were minor wounds he could take care of them himself. A little upset by this answer, the heroine still did not argue with him. The servant hastened to change the subject, mentioning the toy that Lars had taken with her. It was the same teddy bear that Nicole had torn apart, and the man asked if he should throw it away or fix it. Indifferent as it might seem to everything, the heroine asked him to sew it up, apparently unable to fully let go of childhood grievances. Lars asked about Eliza's condition after what happened at the party. The fourth concubine hadn't done anything special since even the regular tea parties she had been holding had stopped. The empress was upset by this answer because she hoped to have a little more fun, and in the end she removed her rival without much effort. And since Eliza was no longer a problem, it was time to deal with the emperor's wrath. This will not be much of a problem, because she has the best weapon in such a situation, her memories from her past life. Even though she had spent 10 years in confinement, cut off from the rest of the world, Shin told her everything. Lars said aloud that she was alive thanks to him, but the man did not hear it, and the girl pretended not to say anything. Although she was grateful, there was no time for such thoughts now. As far as Lars knew, the nearby states had always feared the Shariult Empire, which was the central topic of all rumors. And there was only one reason for this fear: Emperor Zephon, who was known primarily for his cruelty. The main reason that he had so many concubines was that the empire needed to somehow establish diplomatic relations, and relations with Yulain, Eliza's homeland, have always been especially tense. And then the heroine remembered something that would help her establish both diplomatic and personal relations at once. Holding the king's doll in her hands, she had already begun to think of her plan. After all, King Yulin, as she knew from her past life, was about to die. In the past, this event has shocked all people, but it is not too late to change it and benefit from it. Lars asked Shin to apply for an exit from the palace, and he began preparations. And our heroine was already anticipating her triumph, knowing in advance what and how she should do. Meanwhile, the palace was restless. The emperor, as always, approached the solution of problems harshly, which is why his orders were sometimes extremely dangerous for ordinary people. So this time he ordered to find a port for the ship, not paying attention to whether it was friendly. He could not think about it for a long time, because all his thoughts were filled with the image of his wife, who managed to really interest him. He remembered the gentle touch of her fingers on his lips, which had an iron taste of blood. Zephon only now realized how deeply this girl was stuck in his head. The Emperor just chuckled, wondering what else Lars would do to win his favor. And after a while, he found out that our heroine wanted to go on a trip. He did not like this at all. After all, the destination is the kingdom of Uline, Eliza's homeland. After the incident, the man decided that Lars's target was the fourth concubine. He decided that the place and time of the trip were not just a coincidence. At the same time, the Empress asked to say at least something. In response, she received a statement that her too calm face angered Zephon. Lars said that she would not spend more than 2 days there and would return as soon as she finished all her business. Without waiting for an answer, our heroine simply confronted the Emperor with the fact that she would go. The answer was not at all what she thought, because the Emperor insisted on going together. Just like Lars had done before, he simply said that he would go with her, and he did not consider any other options. Zephon, noticing the heroine's confusion, asked if there was a reason why his wife did not want to go with him. Not understanding why Zephon needed this, the heroine, slightly nervous, agreed. His Majesty was reminded that he already had a busy schedule for the duration of the trip, but the Emperor didn't care after all. He made his own schedule and could change it as he wanted, and Lars tried to understand what Zephon was up to and why he needed this trip together. But she didn't care for long, because it was even better. She would have a chance to get closer to the Emperor. As always, self-confident, the heroine was preparing to leave, and the rumors that the imperial couple would spend the night outside the castle together spread throughout the palace, even reaching Eliza's ears. Everyone tried to understand how a man whom people compared to an ice cube dared to do this, because before that he had not even gone anywhere with concubines. Sometime later, the heroes arrived at an inn on the outskirts of Uline, and there was one fact that made Lars nervous. Calm. The Emperor looked on indifferently at the cause of her anxiety. There was only one bed in the room, and it was designed for 2. Just in case, the Empress clarified whether this was definitely their bedroom, and not a separate room for Zephon, to which the innkeeper replied that there was no mistake, and the Emperor personally asked for a room for the spouses. It was quite difficult to believe in this. Such a cold person could not suddenly want to get closer to her. Zephon asked what surprised Lars so much, and she, not knowing how to react, simply said that it was fine. Time passed and the spouses just sat silently in front of each other. Such a situation depressed the girl. She still could not understand why Zephon did this. Lars constantly looked at her watch with concern, no longer so sure that she would have time to do what she had come for. She was sure that they would move into separate rooms, and now they even had dinner together. Although the Emperor was absolutely calm, the same could not be said about our heroine. And most of all, she was worried about the question, why is there only one bed? All the while, Zephon just stared at Lars silently, making her even more nervous. The girl kept looking at her watch, which caught his attention. The Emperor asked what was the matter and what she was waiting for so much. Lars tried to dodge the question, but in such a situation, she lost her usual calm, and her answer sounded unconvincing. Zephon has long realized that this is not just a journey, but he never found out why exactly the heroine started all this. He ordered to interview all the locals, but did not find any information that could help him understand everything. Lars, pulling herself together, did not show that she was up to something, which confused the Emperor even more. The man's gaze fell on Shin, who had been beside his mistress all this time. He asked, "Are these two really always together?" To which the heroine replied that this is true, because Shin is the only one who was on her side from the very beginning. The Emperor continued to ask about the servant. He was surprised that Lars even took him with her to another country, instead of choosing a maid for herself. With such behavior, he surprised the heroine, who did not expect such interest. If she had the chance, she wanted to tease Zephon a little. Lars wondered if the Emperor, known for his indifference, was jealous. However, he sharply replied that this was out of the question. A little upset by the unsuccessful attempt to mock a little, the Empress only smiled sweetly. And now it's time to get ready for bed. The heroine, who had been watching the clock all this time, realized that it was time for her. She ordered Shin to prepare the carriage, intending to carry out her plan. When asked what business she was leaving for, Lars replied that it was just a small job. She was about to go out of the door, but then she was stopped. Zephon grabbed her hand, clearly not wanting to let go so easily, but he wasn't going to find out where Lars was in such a hurry. Instead, he mentioned that they never spent the night together after the wedding. This was the last thing the girl expected. The man threw her onto the bed, making it clear that he was not joking. Lars did not understand what had come over her eternally indifferent husband, and he, in turn, was clearly going to bring the matter to an end. He said that husband and wife should enjoy the night together, so why leave? At some point, Lars completely lost sight of what was going on and why Zephon began to behave this way. But let us pause for a moment to find out what was going on at that very time in a past life. The noise outside the door disturbed the Emperor, who was already irritated from work until late at night. Nicole entered the room, even though the servants tried their best to stop her. Zephon immediately ordered her to be taken out, but she continued to stand her ground. The girl said that she needed to say something very important that could not be postponed. She began by apologizing for not being able to attend the meal together. Nicole stood in tears, hoping that the Emperor would understand her, or rather, she pretended that everything was so. However, he was as cold as ever and just went on with his work. The girl, who actually did not come to apologize at all, decided to move on. Since the cute face and tears did not work, she began to talk about how much she loved Zephon, along the way complaining about Eliza's bullying. But the result was the same. The work for the Emperor was clearly much more important than this conversation. Realizing that she would not achieve anything this way, Nicole moved on to more decisive actions. Throwing off her outer garment, she tried to seduce the Emperor, not realizing what a mistake it was. Zephon's hand reached out to the girl, confident in her own attractiveness. However, instead of caresses, the man grabbed her by the hair, asking if this was the most important topic of conversation. He ordered her not to come again uninvited, otherwise Nicole would be punished. Thrown out of the door, the girl could not understand why her plan did not work. But he didn't have to think long. The Emperor himself explained the reason for his indifference. In his eyes, she was just another incapable woman who did not even inherit any special magic. For Zephon, she is an empty place, capable only of trying to seduce him with her body. And now let's return to the present, where the same Emperor himself seduces his wife. No matter how hard she tried, Lars could not understand the reason for such a sudden interest in her. And even in such a situation, she did not think at all about the possibility of spending the night with her husband. She was much more worried about time, which she did not have much left. She tried to come up with at least some excuse, but it was unsuccessful. Previously cold, the man's gaze now seemed to burn his whole body. His hands touched the girl's hair with unexpected tenderness. Zephon may have been indifferent to the others, but this day was different. He continued to convince the heroine, although not crossing the line, but being on the very verge. The Emperor said that Lars could not prove his worth and live in peace if she fell into his soul now. Even if she lied about the attack on the White Meridian, it didn't matter to him anymore. And if after that there is an heir, then the girl's position will become even stronger. The silhouette of the man was reflected in the eyes of the Empress, so close and soothing. You just need to reach out to reach his face. Maybe this is really the best option? Lars is tired of the eternal battle with everyone around her, necessary just to live in peace. Zephon had suggested something similar in the past. He promised to help the heroine achieve everything she wants. She just needs to become his mistress. But she, then still devoted to her family, refused. Lars wondered if she had agreed then. If she hadn't known all the pain, what would have happened? Would she be able to prolong her existence a little longer, being another concubine? Wouldn't it be easier to be just another unremarkable girl next to the Emperor? Well, maybe it is easier, but this is not at all what our heroine needs. After all, she is much more important than just a concubine, so the easy path is not for her. The Emperor did not expect that his proposal would be rejected, but Lars still had urgent business, and apologizing, she pulled away from the man. Although there was not much time left, she still had time, so the Empress began to prepare for the journey. All the while, Zephon watched her, frustrated and intrigued at the same time. Before leaving, Lars only paused for a moment to wish him a good night's sleep. The Emperor just silently followed her with his eyes. Finally, the girl said that she would be the first to hug her husband, but only when she was in the mood. And so the man was left alone with his thoughts. And he was more than satisfied with this outcome because it is much more interesting this way. Previously, he had not met such girls who were ready to prove their words with deeds and did not choose easy ways. Now Zephon was even more interested in finding out what Lars was going to do. After a short time, the Empress's carriage was already breaking the silence of the night. Under the measured clatter of wheels, the heroine thought over everything that had happened. The events of that evening still did not get out of my head. And the most unexpected thing for Lars was that she almost agreed. It's not that this didn't happen to her in her previous life, but there is one huge difference. This is the first time that she was treated with tenderness, and at the same time she was left with a choice. Previously, such an experience meant only another pain. Chasing away gloomy thoughts, Lars squeezed her eyes shut. Unconsciously, she twisted her hair around her finger, absorbed in her experiences. Even though she was able to get rid of thinking about the past, the present was much more exciting, albeit in a completely different sense. But our heroine quickly came to her senses, and she did not regret her choice at all. After all, what the Emperor wanted was not another mistress. No, he needs a woman who can achieve what he wants without his help. Meanwhile, Shin stopped the carriage after noticing a problem on the road. A noise was heard in the night, which did not bode well. The servant suggested that they wait a little longer before driving on. Lars wondered what made Shin so nervous. It turned out that there was another carriage ahead, surrounded by robbers at the moment. The criminals took everything they could carry, while the owners of the carriage begged at least to let them live. While Shin was thinking about the best course of action, Lars had already stepped out of the carriage. The servant was surprised by his mistress's behavior, and our heroine at that time had already realized that this was where she was going. A handful of bandits were clearly unable to frighten the Empress. Meanwhile, one of the bandits, full of bloodlust, had already raised his sword. A mad gaze was fixed on the victims who were about to die. But at the last moment, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a strange glow. Unfortunately for the man, it was too late. He flared up like a match. Not understanding what was happening, the bandits looked around. But they only saw more comrades engulfed in flames. A real chaos began near the carriage. Lars, surrounded by flames that seemed to dance around her, finally caught the eye of the criminals. Not knowing who they contacted, some decided to fight back. But the Empress, taught by the sad experience of the war, was not at all up to them. All that remained for these men was to look in surprise at the girl who suddenly appeared. After that, they fell one by one, burning like torches in Lars's magic. The girl was bored. It all seemed to be a waste of energy. After the heavy fighting in the war, these robbers seemed to be just bugs, unworthy of her attention. The heroine was surrounded, hoping to get at least some advantage. But it was useless. Maybe her body had become younger, but the skills she had acquired over a long time remained with her. The fire enveloped even the carriage, but did not harm those inside, while preventing the robbers from approaching. Lars unleashed a natural disaster on the criminals, deadly but beautiful in its own way. Shin could only wonder what was happening all this time, unable to intervene. When she was done with the bandits, Lars walked over to the carriage. She already knew who she would see inside because these were the people who were her target. In her past life, the heroine read about this incident in the newspaper, and although the criminals were caught then, it was too late. The couple, still frightened by what had happened, would have been dead by now if not for Lars. The girl hurried to calm the victims. She said that she was just on a walk and heard screams, so she came to help. Grateful people rejoiced at salvation, not yet knowing what awaited them. With a look full of arrogance, Lars greeted the rescued, pretending to recognize them just now. The man was none other than the ruler of the kingdom of Yulain, but the girl next to him was not his wife at all. As in his previous life, the king had a secret date with his mistress. And if this news reached the people, and even more so to the queen, the man could not avoid problems. He pretended that the heroine had identified herself and he was a different person. But it was enough for Lars to introduce herself and mention that they had seen each other more than once at Barry, although she looked a little different then. The king finally realized what situation he was in. Lars looked more confident than in the past, and her hair color was different now. However, it was impossible not to recognize her. The man remembered that our heroine had always been an outstanding mistress, although in society she was considered an evil woman. The king did not know what to do, because the Empress saved his life. But on the other hand, when she found out about his secret meeting, she became a threat to him. Lars gave him time to think, and she herself recalled the events of the past. The news that the king was a traitor and died with his mistress quickly spread around the world, infuriating a huge number of people. The man tried to change the subject, starting a conversation about the Sharialt Empire and the new Empress. But he did not succeed. The heroine directly asked what they should do now. After all, if the queen finds out about what happened, the man will not get off with a simple apology. Ruler Yulin begged Lars not to reveal his secret. Lars didn't mind, but hinted that Yulain and Chariolt had an extremely strained relationship, and it would be nice to fix it. She offered the king the simplest option. Right here and now, conclude an agreement with the heroine on cooperation between their countries. Meanwhile, Zafon was waiting for Lars to return, while away the time reading. It was already quite late when the Empress returned to the room. The wait was too long by a man's standards. The heroine was slightly surprised by the fact that she was expected all this time. The man asked if the girl was on a secret date, to which Lars assured him that she just went for a walk. Then Zafon asked if anything could be more important than a night spent with him. Lars didn't even bother to answer this. The man, still interested in her behavior, continued to ask questions. While the girl was calmly taking off her street clothes, she replied to the emperor with a letter, or rather, an agreement with the kingdom of Yulin. The emperor could not believe his eyes. No one could establish such a relationship between Yulain and Chariolt. Now he has little choice but to recognize Lars's value. After all, now Eliza was really not needed, and the terms of cooperation became much more profitable. The agreement was signed personally by the king's hand, and its authenticity was not in doubt. Zefon wondered how the heroine did it. Lars said that it was just a coincidence, but the intonation said otherwise. The Empress changed the subject, recalling what she had said before leaving. After all, she promised to take the first step when she was in the mood, and now it is just good. So can't she count on at least a kiss? The Emperor, who had rejected all girls in such situations until now, did not mind at all this time. Besides, a little earlier, he wasn't going to just sit and wait. Following Lars's carriage, another carriage was already being prepared. The servants were discussing His Majesty's order to keep an eye on the Empress. Zefon wanted to know what she was up to. Fearing that she would reveal information about Chariolt to anyone, he was ready to kill her in case his suspicions were confirmed. However, the servants only saw how Lars, as if knowing in advance what was going to happen, came to the aid of King Yulain, dealt with the criminals with her monstrous magic, and then threatened the rescued, eventually obtaining this pact. The servants had already relayed this information to Zafon, not forgetting to mention that it looked like Lars had planned everything. Therefore, now the Emperor may not have fully trusted his wife, and was forced to admit that she was really more valuable than an ordinary concubine. The moment their bodies touched, he wondered if she was a witch for being able to force him to recognize her. The night passed, and the morning rays illuminated the palace. Lars combed her hair, and all her thoughts were occupied with the Emperor. In the morning, he behaved as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had happened. Zefon did not become softer or friendlier, even in the carriage he rode in silence. After all, he had 6 mistresses. Maybe he just wanted to check on the Empress? If this is so, then this is at least some progress. However, at that moment, did he really notice how Lars's hands were shaking? The Empress was completely lost in conjecture, and this depressed her. She struggled to calm herself down. And Shin, who was standing next to him, did not understand at all what was going on. Most of all, Lars was depressed by the fact that it was at that moment that she remembered what had happened in her past life. Unable to change anything, the heroine could only regret. Tired of heavy thoughts, the Empress decided to just relax and see what would happen next. To distract herself, she asked her faithful servant if he had ever braided his hair. The man apologized and said that he had never done this. However, after a couple of moments, he was doing his best to give Lars a beautiful hairstyle. And the Empress herself at this time thought that it did not matter how the night went. The main thing was that she had already begun to prove her worth by concluding a treaty with the traitorous king. At this moment, her thoughts were interrupted by a noise from the street. It turned out to be Eliza, who was being forcibly sent home to the kingdom of Yulain. Her retinue was lost. The girls did not know what to do if the 4th concubine was expelled from the castle. Eliza began to say that the servants had no right to treat the emperor's concubine in this way. But her words were interrupted by the most unpleasant news for her. The order was given by Zefon himself. He kicked her out of the palace, so now the relationship with Yulain is established, and Eliza is no longer needed. The girl did not believe the servants, and began to demand a meeting with His Majesty. Lars, who was watching everything, did not expect that the emperor would give up his concubine so easily. But this only played into her hands, and having said goodbye to her now former rival in absentia, the Empress continued to enjoy her vacation. Meanwhile, the Emperor was thinking over everything he had learned about Lars from the servants who were watching her. He had no doubt that she had met King Yulain. The Empress acted as if she knew that the carriage would be attacked, and her magic, with the help of which she destroyed the bandits, is amazing. At the time of signing the contract, she was still pouring threats, and no matter how you look at it, this meeting cannot be called accidental. Apparently, she even knew that the king would be with his mistress, and no one could figure out how she was able to plan this. And as a result, the treaty of trade and friendly cooperation with the kingdom of Yulain was in Zephon's hands. Even an emotionless person like him couldn't help himself. He imagined how he and the Empress would have behaved if King Yulain had indeed sent the invitation they had promised to a reception. Thoughts about Lars flashed through one after another, but the realization did not come immediately. The memories of how he had gently held her hand the night before did not leave his mind. Zephon has only just noticed that warm feeling that fills him every time he thinks of Lars. He didn't seem to believe himself, but his heart insisted that he cared about the girl. The next morning, the sun flooded everything around again, tearing the majestic walls of the palace out of the darkness of the night. And a girl was preparing for the new day, all this time only watching the actions of the Empress, the sixth concubine. Unlike her, the morning of our heroine for the third time did not start so pleasantly. Whoever it is, he is a very diligent person. Once day after day, as if by an alarm clock, he does the same thing. Not that it hurts much, but you can't leave everything as it is either. After all, today again someone sent a very peculiar gift, the corpse of a cat in a box. It's been going on since Eliza left, and the culprit has yet to be found. Lars ordered them to do the same as usual. Then she said that although she was not in the habit of eating cats, she could try to cook it. Of course it was a joke, but Shin didn't realize it until the heroine said it directly. The Empress showed with all her appearance that for her this was something frivolous, not worth attention. But in fact, she would have been shaking at the mere sight of blood if it hadn't been for her past life. During the war, she managed to see many corpses of both people and animals. This continued in the dungeon, where dead rats lay beside her, and in Barry, where she returned after her imprisonment, and where dead animals were thrown into her. Lars has been through too much, and now corpses are just corpses that don't evoke much emotion, except for regret. And now she calmly thought about what to do next, and how to look for the culprit. By this time breakfast was ready. After tasting only a small piece, Lars put the utensils aside. She ordered to gather everyone who worked in the kitchen, as well as other servants. The people who came were visibly nervous, not understanding why the Empress had suddenly called them. She asked everyone to try a salad that she had just started eating. The servants obediently obeyed the order, although they did not know why it was necessary. But the next moment they understood everything. Lars said that was enough, and they could spit out what they were going to eat. There were few cats, now there was also poison in the food. The Empress advised me to rinse my mouth to get rid of the poison, and all this time I was staring at the head maid. The heroine has already understood who the culprit was, and did not delay the punishment. She told the maid bluntly that she knew everything, and could not do anything. She would have to be responsible for this. Taking the plate in her hands, Lars said that there was so much food left, and it was a pity to throw it away. Therefore, someone has to eat it. The unconscious maid was carried away. The Empress said that such a cheap poison could be ignored, but there is a limit to everything. In the meantime, Shin jokingly suggested finding a better poison. Lars replied that as soon as necessary she would immediately inform. Our heroine was not particularly worried because she was trained from childhood to develop immunity to poisons, as well as forced to learn a huge amount of information about them. And even this she did for the sake of her brother and sister, to check if there was poison in their food. Suddenly, the heroine realized who was behind everything with the greatest probability, the one who had the closest relationship with the head maid, who could come up with both the idea of cats and poison, and who got rid of everyone with whom the Emperor became close. Namely, the sixth concubine, who seemed to have finally begun to act. A little later, the attempt to poison the Empress was reported to Zephon. The servant reported that the head maid was the culprit. Zephon immediately asked about his wife's condition, to which he was told that she did not have time to eat much poison, spitting out the first piece of poisoned food. They did not forget to tell about the maid, who is now in a pre-fainting state. Upon learning that the presence of poison in the food and who poured it was personally recognized by the Empress, Zephon smiled, which surprised everyone present. The Emperor ordered to interrogate the head maid and then get rid of her and send the court doctor to Lars. After examining the girl, the doctor said that everything was fine. You just need to drink more water and not strain for the next 3 days, just in case. Our heroine did not expect that the Emperor would send a healer and did not know how to react to this. In addition, she is still immune to poisons. Even in prison, she did not die from poisoning. And even then, in a past life, all attempts to poison the heroine also belonged to the 6th concubine. Lars now regretted that she had suspected Sasha that time. Meanwhile, warm energy emanated from the healer's hands. The man explained that this is the magic of tranquility, which will help alleviate the condition of the Empress. In response to gratitude, he only said that it was his job to ensure the calm state of the Empress. Lars wondered who he was and where he was from, probably a member of some royal family that wielded magic. And the doctor called the heroine the treasure of the empire and the only girl who could help the Emperor in governing the country. After finishing her conversation with the man, the Empress turned to the invited servants, who feared that the same fate awaited them as the head maid. However, instead, they received a considerable amount of money as compensation for taking the poison as well. Lars did this because these people did not intend to harm her, and now they will also be grateful. The servants' opinion of the Empress began to change, and now that the head maid was not around to spread rumors, they saw her better side. For a long time, the servants will discuss the generosity of our heroine. Lars watched them, pleased with the results of her actions. Now most of the people working in the palace will go over to her side. Meanwhile, the 6th concubine, thinking about how to get rid of the Empress, wrote her a letter. Lars did not expect to receive it at all, especially since instead of the expected threats, it contained an invitation to dinner. What awaits our heroine at this reception?